where's the line get drawn? Do you think that designers have to know how to build? Do you think they have to know everything, or do you think that might be actually maybe not so good a thing?
So do you need to know how to code, and should you focus on one specific skill rather than knowing everything?
Yeah.
I personally think you need to code, at least to a basic level, because how are you going to get your rough ideas down and prove yourself right or wrong if you can't do a little sketch on your own in the evening or whatever? When I was at Coolping, we used to have a lot of talks about sort of what teams should be put together for digital projects, and more often than not, the problem that we had was that a designer or two designers would go in a room and they would sit there and they would pretend to know everything and understand everything about the project, and then present this fait accompli to developers, and it was essentially unbuildable. So I think really you need to be aware of your limitations and get the right team around you for a lot of the time, because specialists are going to be infinitely more useful to you than your half-baked ideas. But you should have, well, it's true, but you should also be aware, I guess, that there is this further realm of knowledge that you don't have. If you don't have the awareness that it's there, then you can't tap into it, obviously. But designers should code.
I think it varies massively depending on where you're actually working. So whether you're a freelancer or whether you're in a small team, whether you're in an agency and working with a larger team. But I think I wouldn't necessarily say designers need to be able to code. I think they need to have a solid understanding of what is entailed in terms of coding, as well as things like SEO and user experience. And I think that's important because as a designer, I don't think you should be in a situation where you can be railroaded into making decisions that are on the kind of behest of an expert or someone who thinks they know what they're doing. I've seen many occasions where designers have been told something by an SEO expert and they've just gone ahead and done it, whereas if they had a broad understanding of what's involved, they would be able to make an informed decision and argue back and sort of say, hey, that's not wrong, because that's not right, because you're just lying to me, you SEO people. So yeah, I think it's massively important that knowledge is there, no matter where you are. But I think more so if you are in a small team, I think you need to be able to do more and more of the work. But if you're in a larger agency, I think it purely comes down to knowledge.
Yeah, just kind of mirror what Kev said there. It is more of having an understanding of what's possible rather than actually knowing how to do it. I mean, I started front-end coding before I became a designer, so luckily I know what's possible. I mean, I've heard horror stories of developers being handed PSDs which are absolutely terrible to code up because the designer himself hasn't had any knowledge whatsoever of the web. And I think it is, as we pointed out, it's important to be able, if you can code, it's great to be able to get prototypes out there to people and put them in front of the right people. When I was at uni, I was doing mainly just design stuff and planning out a prototype. It'd all be sort of static, and then I'd hand it to the developer, tell them what the project was, and they'd be able to take that on and continue on it. So yeah, I think definitely a decent understanding of sort of any sort of language. If you're front end, definitely jQuery. If you're doing any interaction for the web anyway. So yeah.
Other JavaScript libraries are available.
Well, yeah. Prototype, jQuery is the thing.
I think there's a couple of things like that. One is I think everybody's really talked about communication, and as a designer, speaking to the right people who are part of either your business or your client's business, get to know the product, that kind of stuff, and get the right people in the room at the right time, and think about, before you even start colouring things in, go to the point of doing a workshop, getting wireframes together and really sort of approaching that. But I suppose the second point is there's now a massive arena of design principles in digital, and don't expect to know all of them, but choose some that you really enjoy and focus on that, and don't make it hard work. And then things you don't know, team up with someone, find a really good coder. But if you're designing for digital, you need to know code to get an understanding of how pages can be built. Whether that ends up being production value code or not is another thing. Especially now we're moving towards the idea of responsive design and that kind of stuff. I think wireframes don't exist as in flat format anymore. I think you really need to start experiencing and experimenting with flexible layouts, etc.
Don't go crashing into the next question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Segueing beautifully into the next question. I think it's an interesting. Me and Rob used to work together at Sense, both as senior designers, and we were talking about this before in reference to some of these questions. Is actually we were both very different. Though we both had exactly the same job title, and really it's extending that approach out. Neither of us were taking overall lead on any project, and we would extend that out to the technical team as well. And I think it's very important to focus on what Rob was saying there in terms about getting the right team for the right project. At this point, it's very hard for one person to kind of know every skill required to design in this medium at the moment because it is so mixed and it is so varied. And really what's going to happen over the next couple of years, we don't know, and we need to be prepared for all of the available options and avenues in terms of being able to explore. I certainly think the days are kind of becoming long gone in terms of a designer handing a front-end developer a PSD and saying, good luck chaps, get on with that. I think more and more, certainly now, I certainly know at Epiphany, we're starting to design from the browser onwards a lot more now because it's a lot quicker and allows you to get everyone to the client a lot easier and a lot quicker. So I think changes in that approach will affect the term of designer at some point because Photoshop I don't think will be the starting point really. I think it will be an end point in terms of tidying things up and getting that brand experience right. So I think kind of what I'm saying is I'm agreeing with Ian, which is I do think at some point designers and front-end developers are pretty much going to be the same thing over the next couple of years, and I think we're going to see that develop a lot more.
I think that the web is always about compromises. You're always having to make compromises for budgets, for turnaround times, and a lot for technology. And I think developers can quite often be very good at saying, oh, well, you can't do that because of this, or you can't do that, or that's going to take ages. And I think a lot of the most interesting projects that we've done actually have benefited from a slight conflict between a designer and a back-ender. I think if you have a designer that's come from a coding background, then subconsciously they obviously won't design things that are challenging or going to make their life difficult. But I think quite often if a developer has a first reaction which is that's going to be really difficult or you can't do that, and then you actually challenge them and they go off and go, actually, no, you can, because there's this new thing that we can do. Then I think that results in, that's what kind of pushes innovation in a way. Problems push innovation and new solutions to problems. And I think if you've got designers that have come from a front-end dev, then they kind of internalise that, so it never kind of comes out into a discussion. So I think, from our point of view, that discussion and that slight conflict, not throwing rulers at each other or anything, but definitely pushes on the quality of the idea.
Yeah, I really agree with you there, Dave, in that if you do let your knowledge of build affect what you want to put out there, then it might tame it a little bit. But I think ultimately there's a big step that we kind of missed out before going into some sort of visual aspect, which is all sort of user experience and the planning, and asking the right questions to say what is it that we actually want to give our client and they ultimately want to give their users. Because if you're focused around the end experience, then hopefully these challenges will come up and you can solve them in a creative way. And I think generally most people I know in the industry have got that thirst for doing something new, that they perhaps would put the easy life on the shelf and they would go for no, okay, let's have a go at this. I'm sure we can make it work. So, but it's a right. I always like to think it's about asking the right questions first, rather than knowing I want to put this logo top left or whatever. It's about what do I want this user to achieve, or what do they want to feel at this point in using this piece of design.